What, you talked about your life as an inspiration, but was there like something more that inspired you? Was there like a moment you decided you were going to do something, maybe one event or something that made you realize that you had to start working, for positive change?
Yeah, there's a few different moments, but one of the moments that comes to mind in particular is a moment where my parents finally divorced or separated. My little brother was born, and he was born with special needs. At the time, we were living in Galveston, Texas. And so my mother and my brother and I, we went to Madison, Wisconsin, where her parents are from, and we went and stayed with my grandparents. And I lived in the basement and was trying to get my life together. I was so broken. I was so hurt. It's amazing that sometimes you can take a person into a different environment, but because of that emotional baggage, they can just begin to manifest the same negative stuff that they were doing in the previous place. And that's what I did. Before I wasn't using my powers for good, I was using my powers for evil. I had kids in all the different high schools selling drugs for me. And, again, trying to be this outlaw, trying to find a way around the system, which I could perceive was unjust. And I remember my grandfather was a consistent positive role model in my life. He was well respected. He was a community leader, and he was encouraging me to make some positive decisions as I was living in his house. And just because of his love and his not being judgmental and believing in me, I started to respond very slowly, taking small steps. But then my grandfather ended up passing away, and I remember going to his funeral, and I just thought, okay, my grandfather, my one lifeline is gone. Is this going to be my excuse to falling into an abyss of darkness and never coming back, or is this going to be, something's going to happen that's going to be productive? So I went to the funeral, and I got to hear my grandfather's story. I got to hear about a young man who was the son of immigrants and how his parents were farmers. But my grandfather had a dream that he wanted to go to school, that he wanted to be a lawyer one day. And despite the fact that no one in his family or ethnicity were becoming lawyers, and they made fun of him, and they said, hey, you just go milk some more cows, go feed some more chickens, you ain't doing that. He held on to that dream and saved up enough money where he ended up leaving the farm, leaving the comforts of that place that he knew so well to confront his destiny. And he ended up going to school, and one of them old school stories where he had to work 3 jobs and have a room and board, and went to school and ended up doing really well, went to law school, and then started giving back to his family, allowed all his brothers and sisters who wanted to pursue a higher education an opportunity to do so. He supported them financially. And then one of the things that I learned then was he didn't stop there. See, at the end of the funeral, we had sort of a receiving line, and I got to meet all these people that my grandfather had touched in his life. And as I was meeting person after person, I realized that my grandfather had been a mentor to many folks. He was a big brother to many kids who had no positive male role model in their life. He had done pro bono work for many people, for nonprofits. He had helped kids who had no parents to help them go to college. And that my grandfather had lived a life where he left a legacy. And so I remember so clearly leaving that funeral home and just looking up into the sky, and I knew that my grandfather had a treasure. I knew that despite the fact that his car and his house was still here on earth, he had a treasure that no one could deny. And part of that treasure was the legacy and the lives that he had touched throughout his life. And I began to ask myself, if I were to die, what would people say about me? That I could party with the best of them, that I could rob people and sell drugs and have a good operation. And then I asked myself, what would I want to be remembered for? And as I began to start thinking about what I could do in the future to be like my grandfather and leave a legacy, I realized that I wanted to be remembered for doing something positive. And maybe it wasn't going to be through Kiwanis and Lions Club and all that kind of thing, but I wanted to find an authentic way to give back. And so I just opened up myself to the universe. And it's a funny thing when you open up yourself to positive opportunities, and all kinds of doors started opening up. And pretty soon I started my own business, which was a hip-hop line of clothing called the GoodLife. And I started volunteering at a teen center at the age of 19, and the rest is history. That's when I started to wake up, and I started to realize, okay, this is my voice. You know, I can be part of the solution, and I've dedicated my life to that ever since.
Amen. And the last question is a two-part thing, which is, what are some of the challenges you see facing young people today, and what advice do you have for a young person who wants to get involved in their community, in the politics, and youth mobilization, whatever? What would you tell them?
So what are the challenges facing youth?
And what advice would you give to a young person who wants to get more involved in their community?
Yeah. Well, I think the challenge right now, at least one of the challenges, is that there's a lot that's happening throughout systems, and systems working together in interlocking ways that can hinder young people from realizing their true power and their true potential. You know, some of the research coming out of the Search Institute in the Department of Spiritual Development indicates that young people are asking very existential questions about who they are and what their purpose is in life. And one of the key findings that came about with this study is that young people don't have enough adults in their life to have these spiritual and existential discussions with. And I think that it's critically important for young people to realize that, you know, they do have a purpose. And it's not the purpose that media is portraying to them. You know, this whole cliche of he or she who dies with the most toys wins is a falsity. It's a fantasy. You know, life is not about the accumulation of money or things, but and how we can live a life of significance and how we can give something to this world through our lives that can have a lasting impact. I think that, you know, there's many different systems, not just media, that's hindering young people from this kind of power and potential, but also many schools have framed education as solely being defined as how well you do on a standardized test, or how well you do in a class, and how well you're able to regurgitate information on a piece of paper. Education has always been about creating citizens who are engaged in the democratic process. It's not just measuring how well you do on a test, but how well you're getting information in the classroom that can be applied to the community, how well you can solve long-standing social problems creatively. You know, I think that a lot of young people don't have an opportunity to develop that creative capital. You know, we get so caught up in this, focus on reading and writing and math, which is critically important, but we don't look at the creative intelligences that young people have. You know, and sometimes we forget that we're moving out of an industrial age into an informational age. One of the number one exports that we in the United States export is entertainment media, and we create movies and music and things like Facebook. Young people need to have an opportunity to develop these creative ideas, their creative potential. And so my advice to young people is really quite simple, is that we need to begin to start thinking critically about what media and society is telling us. We need to understand who we really are and what we are capable of accomplishing. One of my favorite rappers, Immortal Technique, says, "There is no way in the world that we would allow the craziness that is happening in the world to continue if we really knew who we are." So my advice to young people is, do you know reality? Can you engage with reality? Because in reality, you are the change that we've been waiting for. It's not going to come from Obama. It's not going to come from the Tea Party. It's not going to come from Jay-Z coming up with the Blueprint #4 if he comes up with that album. The change we are waiting for is within us. And we need to start incubating these changes on small levels in our classrooms, in schools, and in neighborhood associations, and on large levels, regionally and even nationally, because the solutions are in you. It's in your DNA. And we need to hear your voice. And that's the last thing I want to say is that all young people are good at something. All young people have a positive, unique contribution that the world is waiting to receive. And we need you to start not just exploring outer space, but inner space, and finding those key things that are within you that the world is so desperately waiting for. So that's a little bit of my advice. And and it's an advice from a big brother. I didn't get a chance to tell you my whole story, but my little brother Gabriel ended up passing away, and one way that I've been able to channel that grief is just being a big brother to a generation and believing in them and rooting for them and encouraging them to be all that they could be. So this is advice from the big bro.